Be me, late 20s freelance photographer for about 4 years now. Weddings, corporate events, gallery openings, private portraits, whatever. Comes in not the most glamorous career, but I built it myself. And nobody tells me when to show up live in a decent apartment with my girlfriend Quinn. Been together almost 2 years, living together for one of them. She works at a nonprofit, does advocacy and outreach work, very into gender politics, reads a lot, posts constantly about systemic stuff, and male toxicity and the patriarchy. First time I met her was at a mutual friend's birthday thing. She was in the middle of an argument with some guy about representation in media. She was sharp, holding her ground, clearly knew what she was talking about. I thought that was genuinely attractive. We talked for a while, exchanged numbers, went on a few dates. She was funny and direct and had real opinions about things. The activism side of her was always there from the start, but it felt like part of who she was, not something she was performing. I wasn't really into politics of any kind, so I just kind of accepted it as her thing. First year together was genuinely good. We disagreed on small stuff, but it never felt serious. She'd want to talk about some documentary she watched. I'd only half understand what she was saying. She'd laugh at me for it. Normal couple stuff. She cooked sometimes. I cleaned up after. We had a system weekends we'd walk somewhere, find a coffee place, talk about nothing in particular, the kind of easy that you don't notice until it's gone. Her friends were mostly from her work world, very similar to her, all very online about everything. I'd meet them at dinners sometimes and feel slightly outside the conversation. Not unwelcome, just not really inside it either. She'd explain things to me afterward, context about who said what and what it meant politically. I took it in and didn't have much to add. She didn't seem to mind. Said she liked that. I wasn't performative about it. That I was just honest about not knowing things. I appreciated that about her. Back then, somewhere in the middle of the second year, things started to feel different, not a sudden shift. More like the temperature in a room dropping slowly, without you noticing until you're cold. She started going to more events and meetups and gatherings through her work. Sometimes she'd invite me, sometimes she'd just go and come back late. The times I went along, I started to notice something. She was very at ease around other men, and I don't mean in a normal, friendly way. I mean the kind of ease where she'd touch someone's arm while laughing, or lean in close when talking, or hold eye contact longer than necessary. At the time I watched it and told myself it was nothing. She's confident, she's social, she just has that kind of energy. A lot of people are like that. The first time I said something about it was after a fundraiser thing. She'd invited me to one of her colleague organizations, was hosting it. Everyone in suits, open bar, that kind of night. Quinn spent a solid chunk of the evening talking to this guy from some partner group. He was tall, very animated, clearly into the conversation. She was doing the lean-in thing, the arm touch, the laugh that goes on a beat longer than normal. I watched it from across the room and felt something I didn't quite know what to do with. On the drive home, I brought it up. I said something like, "Hey, that seemed pretty flirty back there." She looked at me the way you look at someone who's just said something slightly embarrassing in public. Then she explained it, said flirting is just energy, it's social, it doesn't carry meaning unless you assign meaning to it. Said women reclaiming their right to be playful and confident in social spaces is healthy and important. Said my discomfort was my own thing to examine. Not her behavior to change. Said she needed to feel free in social settings, and that my jealousy was a pattern she'd noticed before. I didn't have a counter to any of that. I sat with it, thought about it over the next few days, decided maybe she was right. Maybe I was bringing some old-school possessiveness into this that I hadn't examined. She sent me an article a few days later about how jealousy in relationships functions as a control mechanism. I read the whole thing, tried to apply it to myself, concluded that, yeah, probably I needed to loosen up. We moved on. A few weeks later, there was a party at someone's apartment. Someone from her circle. She went earlier with her friends, and I came after a shoot, walked in and found her in the kitchen, with some guy she was doing exactly the same thing as at the fundraiser, laughing, leaning in, hand going to his arm. Every few sentences I stood in the doorway for a moment. She saw me, smiled, went back to the conversation. Introduced me eventually. The guy was perfectly nice, shook my hand, whatever. But the rest of the night felt off. I didn't hover, I went and talked to other people. But I was aware of her the whole time. On the way home, she said, I'd been weird, said she could feel something coming off me, and it made her uncomfortable, Said she felt like she had to be aware of me across the room all night. I said, I wasn't doing anything. I was just at the party. She said it was the energy I was giving off. Said I need to work on what I carry into social situations. I genuinely did not know what to say to that. I shoot events for work. I talk to strangers every weekend. I am not a socially anxious person. But okay, this kept happening in some form over the following months. Different events, different guys, same dynamic, and every time I said anything about it, there was a framework for why I was the problem. She'd talk about male insecurity and how men conflate women's social freedom with disloyalty, sent me more articles. One was about how jealousy is rooted in patriarchal ownership models. Another was about how confident women attract more social energy and that men need to unlearn their discomfort. With that, I actually read them. I was genuinely trying to figure out if she was right about me. Because when someone keeps redirecting every conversation back to your psychology, eventually you start to believe them. Especially if you're someone who already spends a lot of time in your own head. Shooting weddings, you see a lot of different relationship dynamics up close. You notice patterns. I started to notice a pattern in my own relationship, but I didn't know what to call it. Yet then something happened that made things a lot harder to ignore. I got a job shooting a corporate dinner in another city not far. A couple hours drive, drove out the day before to check the venue, talk to the coordinator, figure out the lighting situation. The venue was a hotel attached to a nice restaurant, the kind of place with low lighting and a very quiet carpet and cloth napkins folded into triangles. I was walking through the main dining area, heading toward the back where the event space was, and I saw Quinn sitting at a table near the window with a man I had never seen before. She was leaning forward, chin resting on her hand, laughing at something he'd said, not the polite social laugh, the real one. Her hand was on the table and it was close to his. He was leaning toward her. They were in some kind of closed-off bubble. I stopped walking, just stood there in the middle of a restaurant with people moving around me. A waiter went past me with a tray, and I stepped to the side. My brain was doing that slow catch-up thing. Quinn had told me she was having dinner with friends that evening. There were no friends at this table, just this man. I didn't know. I stood there for probably 5 seconds. Something told me not to walk over. Not anger, not even a decision, really. More like my feet just didn't go in that direction. I turned and went to find the coordinator, did the whole walkthrough, took notes, made a plan, drove to the hotel, lay in the hotel room that night, looking at the ceiling. She hadn't technically lied. She'd said she was having dinner, and she was having dinner. She hadn't said who. With I hadn't asked. Technically nothing wrong. Had been said, technically I finished the shoot the next day and drove home. Hadn't texted her anything about it. When I got back, she was on the couch with her laptop, some documentary playing in the background. She said, "Hey, how was it?" I said, "Fine, good venue." Clean lighting, sat down across from her, and told her I'd walked through the restaurant at the venue and that I'd seen her there. Her laptop didn't close immediately, but her hands stopped moving on the keyboard. She asked what I meant. I said, I walked through the dining area and saw her sitting with someone at a table by the window. Now the laptop closed, she asked if I was following her. I said I was at my job. I was walking through a restaurant to find a coordinator. She said it was a big coincidence. I agreed that it was. She said it felt like surveillance. I said, I walked through a restaurant and saw her sitting there. She said this was exactly the kind of behavior she'd been worried about, that men frame their monitoring as accidents, that jealousy always finds a justification. Said she was allowed to have dinner with whoever she wanted, that her social life was not something she had to report. To me, said, my discomfort was mine to deal with. I sat there and listened to all of it. Something felt very heavy in my chest. I said I wasn't trying to monitor her. I was just telling her what I'd seen, that it felt strange to find out she was having dinner with someone she hadn't mentioned. She said she doesn't announce every meal she has said. Treating her social interactions as something that required disclosure was controlling behavior. Said she was disappointed I was making it into a thing, and the thing that I'm still not entirely proud of. I apologized. I said I wasn't trying to make her feel watched, and that wasn't my intention. She accepted it with this kind of patient tiredness, like I was a recurring issue she'd learned to manage. We went to bed. I lay awake a long time, going over it, wondering if she was right, that I'd done something wrong. She hadn't addressed the dinner. Not once the entire conversation had been about my walking through a restaurant, and I'd ended up sorry the days after that. She was a little cooler than normal, but not openly hostile, more like someone who has forgiven you for something and is letting you know they've forgiven you. Like there was a tally somewhere, and it had a mark on my side. I tried to just move past it. She went back to her normal self. After a while, life continued. I had a few jobs that kept me busy. Shot a birthday party, a headshot session, a small commercial thing for a local business work helps. It always does. When I'm behind the camera, I'm not thinking about anything else. That's probably why I've kept doing it. But something had shifted in how I was reading things, like a frequency I'd always been receiving. But now I could actually hear it. Another few weeks went by. There was a gathering at someone's place, friends of friends, the kind of party where, about a third of the people we went together. Quinn started talking to someone almost immediately after we walked in. Apparently she knew him from a conference she'd attended. I got a drink, found someone else to talk to, tried to just be at the party, but I kept catching it in my peripheral vision throughout the night. The same lean, the same laugh, the hand on the arm. I didn't say anything to her about it the whole evening. On the drive home, she said she'd felt my discomfort from across the room. Said it affected her ability to be present and enjoy herself. Said she was serious about my jealousy being a pattern that was becoming a problem in our relationship. I looked out the window and said, okay. She said she needed me to really engage with that, not just say, okay. I said, okay, I hear you. I didn't sleep great that night. The next day I called. Jake is a friend from years back, school years, one of those people where you can say the actual thing instead of the edited version. We met up for coffee a day or two later. I told him everything started from the fundraiser, went through the articles she'd sent, the apartment party, the restaurant, the confrontation, the apology, the gathering. He listened to all of it without interrupting. That's one of those things about Jake. He doesn't fill silence with reassurance while you're still talking. He actually waits. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Looking at his cup, then he said one thing. He said, "Did she apologize for anything?" I thought about it, genuinely sat there and went through everything she hadn't, not once through any of it. She'd never addressed the dinner with the unknown man. She'd never acknowledged that any of her behavior might be worth examining. Every single conversation had ended with me reflecting on something I'd done. Jake said, "That's the thing he wanted me to sit with." He said, "You didn't catch her doing something and blow up about it. You walked through a restaurant, you had a calm conversation at home, and you ended up apologizing for what exactly I didn't answer." He said she didn't have to defend anything, because within about 30 seconds it became a conversation about your behavior. Instead, he said, think about the whole flirting framework she's given you, that it's just energy. It doesn't mean anything. You're insecure for feeling anything about it. What does that logic actually mean for you? Where does it leave you? I said. It leaves me with no say in any of it. He nodded, said, yeah, said she's constructed something where she gets complete freedom, and any reaction you have is proof. You're the problem, said that's not a relationship. That's a setup. He also said something else that I've thought about since. He said, notice that her whole framework is about what your feelings mean about you, never about what her behavior means, about her every article she sent you, every conversation, all of it aimed at explaining why your reaction is the issue. I sat with that. It was accurate. Not a single one of those conversations had ever started with her asking herself anything. We talked for another hour or so, got into other stuff, finished the coffee, drove home, but something had landed differently this time. Not rage. Nothing dramatic, more like when you've been trying to solve a puzzle by rotating the same piece over and over, and then you flip it and it just fits. I had spent months trying to correct myself based on her read of the situation. Not once had her read of the situation ever included herself as someone who might be doing something worth looking at. I had apologized for walking through a restaurant. I thought about that one for a while. The thing I want to be clear about is that nothing I did after that conversation with Jake was a plan. I didn't sit down and decide to change my behavior, to teach her something. I just stopped performing, stopped doing the thing I'd been doing for months, where I organized my time and my reactions around what would feel acceptable to her. A friend asked if I wanted to come to something. I said yes. Jake wanted to grab food on a weeknight. I went. A client offered a job out of town. On a weekend, I took it when Quinn texted. I answered when I had a moment, not the second the notification appeared. Not coldness, just normal. The thing is, it felt immediately different to be that normal, which told me a lot about how not normal things had been. I started sleeping better almost immediately. That sounds small, but it wasn't for months. I'd been waking up slightly anxious in a low-level way. I couldn't pin down. That stopped. I got back into some stuff. I'd let slide had been meaning to reshoot some portfolio pieces for a while. Finally did. It went through old hard drives and reorganized years of work. The kind of tasks you only have energy for when nothing is quietly draining you in the background. I also started eating better, which sounds stupid, but it's real when you're subtly stressed all the time. You eat whatever's fast. I started cooking again, nothing fancy, just actual meals. The apartment felt different when she wasn't the reference point for everything in it. She noticed within the first week started asking where I was going, what time I'd be back, who I was meeting, which I found interesting, given that she'd explained very clearly that people in relationships don't owe each other schedule reports. I answered simply and didn't elaborate. She said I seemed different. I said I wasn't. Just busy with work. She said it felt like something had changed. I said I was fine. A week or so after that, she brought up that she'd seen a name in my messages while borrowing my phone, a woman who'd assisted on a shoot I'd done recently. Quinn asked who she was. I said a colleague. She'd worked a job with me. She said it looked like we texted a lot. I said photographers communicate with their assistants. It's logistics. She pushed a little, asked how we knew each other. I said I hired her for an event. She pushed a bit more, and I heard myself say, I didn't think I had to explain every professional contact I have. I said it very calmly. It just came out. Quinn went quiet for a second. I could see on her face that she recognized the logic. It was hers. It was the exact shape of the argument she'd used on me, multiple times. She didn't say much after that. There was a tension in the apartment over the following days, but I didn't rush to smooth it over. I used to do that instinctively, any friction, and I'd be the one to start bridging the gap, checking in, asking if she was okay. This time, I just let it sit. Not out of cruelty, I just had nothing to fix. She was the one who eventually started. The conversation said she felt disconnected and that she needed more presence from her partner. I said, I heard that she waited. I didn't offer anything else. She said it felt like I was withholding. I said I wasn't. I was just living. She said that wasn't enough of a response. I said I didn't know what other response she was looking for. She said I was being evasive and that it was a form of emotional manipulation, that she'd read about this pattern. Avoidant attachment used as punishment. I listened to all of it. Then I said, I wasn't punishing anyone. I just stopped apologizing for things I hadn't done. She said that was an unfair characterization. I said, maybe things stayed unresolved around that time. I got a booking that ended up being significant. A gallery was hosting an opening night event, cocktails, local artists, the kind of crowd that takes photos of the drinks as much as the art. They needed someone to document the whole evening, decent rate, interesting venue. I said yes. Quinn found out about it through her own channels. Said she'd been invited too. Knew some of the people involved, told me she was planning on going. I said, that's fine, I'll be working, but I'll be there. She seemed genuinely pleased about it. Said it would be nice to be in the same place, for a change, the night of the event. I arrived early, checked the space, talked to the organizer about what they wanted, documented good lighting in the gallery, moody in the right way for that kind of work. The art on the walls was interesting actually, large format stuff, a lot of texture. I spent a few minutes just walking through before anyone arrived. Those empty minutes before an event starts are always the best ones for a photographer. You get the space without the noise. Quinn arrived later with a couple of people. She knew she was dressed up, looked good, clearly happy to be there, gave me a quick kiss when she found me, and went off into the crowd. I started working. There's a particular mode you go into when you're shooting an event. You're present, but you're not really there. You're just watching through a frame moving through the room, reading the light, looking for moments worth keeping. I worked my way through the space, got good coverage of the installations and the crowd. At some point I was toward the far end of the gallery near the bar area. I was framing a wider shot of a cluster of people gathered around a large piece on the wall. Quinn walked into my frame. She was over by the bar with someone I didn't recognize. I was looking at her through the lens. She had no idea I was 20 feet away. She was doing the thing, the lean, the laugh, both hands on her drink, but angled toward him, her head tilted. He was saying something, and she was responding with her whole posture. I watched it through the viewfinder, for a moment, everything in focus. The light was actually very good over there, warm and even. I pressed the shutter, professional reflex, lowered the camera, stood there for a second, looked around the room, went and found. The organizer told him I had solid coverage. First 90 minutes were well documented. He had everything he'd need. He thanked me, said great work. I went to the code area, packed my gear bag, zipped the case, walked to the side, exit, pushed through into the cold. Outside, walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat for a minute without starting the engine. Then I drove home. I'd been back maybe an hour when the messages started. Quinn asking where I was. I answered that I was home. She said she'd been looking for me and couldn't find me. I said I'd finished the shoot and left. She called. I picked up. She was confused more than anything, asking what happened, why I'd left without saying anything. I said I was done with the job and I went home. She said she would have come with me if she'd known I was leaving. I said I didn't know her plans for the rest of the evening. She said she came home not long after, when she walked in. She was unsettled, not quite angry yet, more like someone who'd lost the ground under them. She asked again what had happened. I said nothing, I was tired, I finished the work. I left, she sat across from me, and said something felt wrong, said she'd felt abandoned at the event. That word abandoned, I said, I hadn't abandoned her, I had completed a job and driven home. She said to leave without saying goodbye. I said something like I didn't think I needed to announce my departure. The air in the room changed. She looked at me. I said, I want to tell you something. She said, okay. I said, I saw you at the bar tonight. She started to say something. I said, I was 20 feet away with a camera through the viewfinder. She stopped. I said, I'm not here to accuse you of anything. I just want you to know that I saw it and that I packed my gear and left. Not because I was angry, because I didn't want to stand in that room watching it while I was supposed to be working. She said she was just talking to someone. She knew. I said, I believe you. She said it wasn't anything. I said, I'm sure it wasn't. She looked at me like she'd walked into a room expecting furniture and found something else entirely. She said, so what's the problem? Then I said, I'm just telling you what happened. She said, it felt passive-aggressive. I said, I wasn't trying to be. She said she felt humiliated when she couldn't find me. I said, I understand that was uncomfortable. She said that wasn't an apology. I said, no, it isn't. She shifted, said, I was being emotionally unavailable and that it was affecting the relationship. Said, withdrawing without explanation is a form of emotional manipulation. Said, this was a documented pattern in men with avoidant attachment. She had an article for this one too. I could tell by the way she was framing it. I let her finish. Then I said, you've told me multiple times that flirting is empowering and doesn't carry meaning, that my discomfort with it was my thing to examine. Not your behavior to change, she said. Yes, I said so. Tonight I watched you do exactly that. And I chose to leave instead of standing there feeling like a piece of furniture at my own job. She said those are completely different situations. I said, I know you think that. She said I was comparing her personal freedom to me, walking out on her. I said I wasn't comparing anything, just explaining what I did and why. She said I was acting like a child. I said, maybe she stood up, said she needed space, went to the bedroom. I opened my laptop, connected the card reader, pulled up the files from the shoot. The gallery had genuinely good light, went through everything, methodically, installation shots, group candids, portrait moments, the crowd at the bar area. Then I got to it. Quinn and the man at the bar, sharp focus, warm light, clean composition. She's laughing at something, her weight shifted toward him, his posture open in her direction. I looked at it for a while, right-clicked, marked it as not. For delivery, went to the next image, finished the coal around midnight. Quinn had fallen asleep, or at least gone quiet. I made something to eat, sat at the table, looked out at the street. I wasn't angry. Sitting there wasn't even sad in the way I might have expected more, like tired in a way that had nothing to do with being sleepy. Tired of the specific weight of a thing that had been pressing on me for months without me fully naming it. I thought about the restaurant and the way the conversation had ended with me apologizing, thought about the articles about jealousy as control about being told I needed to examine my discomfort while nothing about the situation causing that discomfort was ever examined. Thought about Jake saying she hadn't apologized for anything that was still true. She never had. The next morning she came out quiet, made her coffee, stood at the counter, eventually sat down, said she'd been thinking, said she felt like we'd both been struggling and she wanted to talk about how to fix things. I said I was willing to talk. She said she needed to feel like I was actually present in the relationship, that my recent distance was affecting her. I said I understood. She waited for me to offer something, some reassurance or plan. I didn't. She said she also needed me to acknowledge that leaving the event without telling her was not okay. I said, I hear that it upset her. She said hearing it and acknowledging it was wrong are different things. I said, I know she looked at me for a long time, said something had shifted in me, and she didn't know if she recognized it. I said something had shifted. Yeah, she asked. What I said, I stopped trying to convince you I'm the problem every time you feel something. She said she hadn't done that. That was an unfair characterization. I said she'd sent me articles about male jealousy as a control mechanism after a conversation where I said, hey, that seemed flirty, and she said I was insecure. She said that was different context. I said, sure. She said I was being defensive and closed off. I said, maybe she said she wanted us to work on it together. I said I was open to that. She said it didn't feel like I was. I said that was fair. She got frustrated, said she felt like she was talking to a wall, said this was the avoidant pattern she'd been reading about, shutting down to maintain control. I said I was listening, I just wasn't agreeing with everything. She said agreement wasn't what she was asking for. I said, okay, what were you asking for? She didn't quite have an answer to that. She said she just needed me to meet her. I said I was sitting right here. She said I knew what she meant. I said I wasn't sure I did anymore. That came out flat, not angry, just honest. She went quiet again. We sat there for a while. The conversation found its edge and stopped. She said she needed a few days at a friend's place to think. I said, okay. She packed a bag that afternoon. I watched her car from the window. Then I went to my desk, had another job to prep for, put music on, worked through the afternoon. It was actually a good few hours, the kind of afternoon where you're just doing what you're good at and nothing else is pulling at you. That feeling was new or not new exactly, just something I'd forgotten was possible. The following days we talked some. She came back after a few days. We tried more conversations. She said she wanted to fix things. She said she'd been thinking about the relationship and what she needed. At one point she came back with a different angle, said she'd spoken to a friend about what had been happening, and that the friend agreed my behavior showed signs of emotional withdrawal as a power tactic. I said that's one way to read it. She said, what's another way? I said another way is that I just stopped being available on demand. She said those mean the same thing. I said I don't think they do. Each conversation circled the same territory. She said I had become emotionally unavailable. I said I had been emotionally available for a long time, and I couldn't point to a single moment where that had been matched. She didn't have an answer to that. She said I'd changed. I said yeah. I had the version of me that she'd been with for the past several months was one that took the framework she gave me and tried to fit myself inside it. This version didn't do that anymore, not out of cruelty, not out of strategy. I just ran out of the thing that made me keep trying. It turned out that thing had been load-bearing. The whole arrangement had depended on me, taking her read of the situation seriously enough to keep adjusting once I stopped. She didn't have much left to work with. Things wound down over the following weeks. I won't stretch it into more than it was. It ended the way most things end, not in a single moment, but in accumulation gradually and then all at once. I'm not going to say I handled everything perfectly. Probably there were moments where I was cooler than I needed to be. Probably some of the distance I kept was excessive. But what I can say is that I stopped lying to myself about what the situation was. And once you do that, it's very hard to go back to the version where you were still trying to make it work. She said at one point near the end that I'd become someone she didn't recognize. I thought about that a lot afterward. I think what she meant was that the version of me she'd been operating around was one. She could redirect one who would take the framework she handed him and try to fit himself inside it. That was the version she'd known. This one just wasn't available for that anymore. And I think that's fine. Sometime after she'd fully moved her things out, I was archiving old shoot files, going through folders, labeling, organizing the kind of task you put off until you have a quiet stretch. Came across the gallery event folder, opened it, went through the selects. There were actually some strong images in there. The artists were interesting to photograph. A lot of expressive faces got to the one marked not for delivery. Opened, it looked at it again, genuinely good photo. Technically the light, the focus, the composition. She's laughing, he's leaning in, the bar bottle soft in the background. I looked at it for about 10 seconds, considered deleting it, didn't mark it, archived instead, closed it open the next job. A wedding, a couple weeks out, I started going through the shot list the bride had sent. A very detailed email about must-have moments. I read through it and started planning work is work.